Hi, it's me, the storyteller. Thank you for joining me. Most of my stories on this channel are based on actual events, and some aren't. I'll let you decide if these stories are fiction, or if they're not. Rain hammered the Chicago skyline, warping light through the apartment windows like smudged glass. Marissa sat curled on her couch, laptop warming her thighs, the soft buzz of the old radiator rising and falling behind the thunder. She hadn't ordered dinner, but when the buzzer sounded, she instinctively pressed the intercom. A man stood outside her door moments later, soaked through, holding a single pizza box under one arm. He looked older than the usual delivery drivers, with dark, restless eyes and a too-thin face. Rain had smeared the ink on the order slip taped to the box, but he held it out anyway, muttering something about a delivery for Unit 1203. Marissa shook her head. She hadn't ordered anything. The name on the slip didn't match hers either. Someone named C. Fletcher. Still, her unit number was listed. A simple mistake, she figured, one that made her uneasy for no particular reason. She asked him to double-check the name. Before he could answer, the door across the hall creaked open. Mr. Latch emerged with a garbage bag slung over one shoulder, nodding to Marissa with that usual calm smile of his. He was the building's landlord and lived 2 doors down. Always courteous, always present. The delivery man's expression shifted the moment he saw him. He took an unconscious step backward, eyes narrowing with recognition. He didn't say anything. He only stared at Latch for a second too long before mumbling something about confirming the address and walking off into the rain. Marissa thought nothing of it at the time. The following evening, the same man returned. No pizza this time. Just himself, soaked again, holding a plastic sleeve containing a few folded papers. He looked worse, like he hadn't slept. She opened the door only part way. He told her the delivery had been a genuine mistake, but being on her floor, at her door, had triggered something. He thought he recognized Latch, said the man had once managed another building on the south side, said his sister had lived there. She vanished 2 years ago. Marissa said nothing. The man seemed unstable, paranoid. She edged the door closed. He didn't resist. Before leaving, he set a pizza box on the floor, without explanation, and disappeared into the stairwell. Inside the box was no pizza, only a flyer, a missing person's notice, water-stained but readable. The young woman in the photo had his eyes. Minutes later, Latch knocked on her door, said he heard the visitor again, asked if she was all right. His voice was warm, concerned. Marissa nodded, unsure what to say. Latch asked a few gentle questions. How long had the man been there? Did he try to force entry? Had he left anything? When she showed him the box, Latch raised his brows and offered to call the police on her behalf. Said it might be good to file a report. But when Marissa hesitated, saying it would probably blow over, he backed off and said he understood. He even offered to make her a cup of coffee in his apartment to help calm her nerves. She declined politely. Still, he lingered, making sure she knew she could always knock on his door. The next morning, Marissa spotted the delivery man again. This time, he stood across the street from the building, watching the windows. He looked up just as she stepped outside. Their eyes met. He didn't run. He held out a photo, a grainy, low-resolution still from what looked like security footage. A hallway. In the background, unmistakably, stood Mr. Latch. The girl from the flyer was in the foreground, back turned, blurred mid-step. The date stamp was from 2 days before she was reported missing. Marissa backed away without taking it. That afternoon, the unease finally tipped. She called the police. Officers arrived that evening, took her statement, and promised to look into the delivery man. Latch appeared during the visit, asking if everything was all right. Said he noticed the patrol car, offered to speak with the officers himself, if needed. The cops thanked him, but said they had what they needed. He smiled and said he'd keep an eye out. That night, the storm returned. The building lights flickered. When the knock came, she already knew who it would be. Mr. Latch stood outside her door, flashlight in hand, concerned expression etched into his face. Said he was making rounds during the outage, just checking on tenants. She let him in. His presence was calming, she told herself. Familiar. Safe. He moved through the apartment slowly, commenting on the weather, the age of the wiring, how storms always made him nostalgic. Then he frowned, reached into his pocket, and said his phone was dead. Asked if he could borrow hers to call the electric company. Marissa hesitated, then handed it over. He turned away to make the call, but instead of dialing, he powered off the phone and slipped it behind his back. When he turned back, he wasn't smiling. He said something strange about the tenant who had lived there before her, how she had been quiet too, kept to herself. Just like Marissa, he stepped closer, said she never left either. Then, from his coat pocket, he pulled a cloth, doused in something acrid and sweet-smelling. Marissa recoiled, realizing too late. He lunged. She fought, kicking back chairs, screaming as loud as her lungs would allow. He clamped the cloth toward her face. Then the front door exploded inward. The delivery man, Eli, rushed in, not alone this time. Armed agents followed, shouting commands. Latch was pulled off her and pinned to the floor. Marissa fell back against the wall, shaking. One of the agents lifted a pizza box from her counter and opened it, revealing a tiny device tucked into the cardboard lip, a wiretap. They had been listening the entire time. The FBI had obtained a warrant to place audio surveillance in the boxes, tracking Latch based on past disappearances. Eli identified himself fully now. He had gone undercover after connecting the case to his missing sister. Latch had worked under different names, owned several properties, and left a string of unsolved vanishings in his wake. Behind his walls, they found proof: hair, jewelry, clothing fragments, duct tape, names, dates. Latch wasn't just a landlord. He was a seasoned predator who had hunted in plain sight for years. Marissa's report had broken the pattern. She had survived where others hadn't. Eli remained nearby through the process, visible now. He helped her identify documents, guided her through statements. This time, he didn't vanish. He sat with her in the hallway the morning after the arrest as the storm began to clear. And in the silence that followed, the truth finally stepped into the light. Bridgeport, Connecticut, 2003. Before the Crescent View apartment complex collapsed in on itself, figuratively and eventually literally, it was just another forgotten brick husk along the edge of Seaview Avenue. 6 floors, 34 units, and a hallway that smelled like mold, wet dog, and pipe tobacco, depending on the hour. For Mark Avery, it was supposed to be temporary, just 3 months covering for the regular super while he recovered from surgery. A paycheck, a place to stay, and a few broken fixtures to deal with. But the building had other ideas. From the start, something felt off. Tenants moved like ghosts, quiet, watchful, never meeting the eye. No one said hello. No one asked questions. And one by one, they warned Mark Avery the same way. Don't bother apartment 3E. Keep the keys on your ring, but never use them. He assumed it was superstition. Every place had its quirks: a drafty stairwell, a leaky ceiling, a tenant with too many cats. But 3E wasn't about smell or noise. It was about presence, the kind that settled deep in the chest and didn't move. The man who lived there never spoke. He simply sat, every day without fail, on the tiny wrought iron balcony that overlooked the empty lot across the street. Always in the same brown cardigan, in the same pale slacks, back straight, hands folded, and a smile stretched too wide across his face. Not a neighborly smile, not even human, just teeth, visible, rigid, permanent, as if the skin might tear if he blinked the wrong way. Most evenings, Mark would see him while locking up the side entrance or walking out for groceries. The balcony lights never turned on, but he could see that grin, lit faintly by the flicker of a street lamp, unmoving, untouched by wind or cold. Even in the rain, the man remained outside, eyes half-lidded and locked forward. The man never left the chair. At first, it was easy enough to ignore. Mark told himself the guy was harmless. Strange, sure, but not dangerous. Maybe mentally ill. Maybe one of those silent war veterans who'd been left alone too long. And yet, there was something else. Something that made the air bend when you got too close to that door. Something that made the third-floor hallway feel longer than the others. The man was always smiling, but he never blinked. One night, after unclogging a sink in 4D, Mark looked down over the stairwell railing and spotted the man again, still outside, still staring. But something had shifted. The curtain inside the apartment blew gently behind him. No lights were on inside, and the man's reflection, cast dimly in the balcony's glass door, didn't match his posture. That was the first time it occurred to Mark. Maybe the man wasn't really sitting there. By the end of the second week, tenants started leaving. A woman on 5B packed up in the middle of the night. 2 others moved out with barely a word. One of them left their furniture behind entirely. When Mark asked the landlord if that was normal, the man just shrugged and muttered that turnover in a building like this was always high. Then came the laughter. At first, it was easy to dismiss. Thin, dry chuckling echoing faintly through the vents at night. Probably the neighbor's TV. Probably someone on the floor below. But it kept happening. Always the same sound. Always between 2 and 4 a.m. It would start as a low hum, just breath, and then rise into something higher. Too long to be human. Too layered to be a single voice. One tenant tried to confront the man. A young guy, college-aged, who lived down the hall. He knocked on the door to 3E late one night and was never seen again. Just gone. The apartment was cleared out by someone else a few days later. The landlord said nothing. Eventually, Mark stopped asking questions. The job was nearly over anyway. But then came the footprints. He was called down to 2C just before dawn. The tenant was pale, eyes ringed with panic, pointing toward the hallway carpet. Wet prints led from the unit's entrance to the foot of the bed and stopped. No return trail. No sign of forced entry. Just mud, still damp, tracked in a straight line. The chain lock had been latched all night. Mark checked the windows, the vents, even the fire escape. Nothing. But the prints were unmistakable. Too large for the tenant's feet. Too deep. The kind of depth made by someone heavy. Someone who didn't care about being seen. The next night, Mark sat outside apartment 3E with a clipboard and a lie about checking for water pressure. He waited for nearly 2 hours, listening to the faint rattle of the wind and the creak of pipes, before inserting the key and turning the knob. The door opened too easily. The air inside was foul, sweet and metallic, with the weight of something sealed too long. The apartment was empty. No furniture, no smell of food, no carpet, just warped floors, blotched walls, and a single wooden chair sitting in front of the open balcony door. It faced the street, placed dead center in the room. There were grooves in the floorboards beneath it, like the legs had been there a very long time. The rest of the unit was hollow. Cabinets with no shelves, a bathroom mirror stained dark, no dishes, no photos, no toothbrush, not even a bed. In the bedroom, the closet door hung open. Something about it felt wrong. The shadows beneath it were too deep. The angles didn't match the walls. Still, he stepped inside, and that's when he saw them. Teeth, embedded in the drywall like fossils. Jagged, cracked, some broken at the root. Hundreds of them, too large, too sharp, curled into strange patterns across the plaster like they'd grown there. The wall pulsed faintly, and he could almost swear they were still alive. No blood, just enamel and empty gum lines, dried and waiting. Then came the sound. Laughter. This time, not from the vents. Not distant. It was inside the room. Mark turned and saw the man, no longer on the balcony, now inside. Standing in the center of the bare floor with his hands clasped and that same impossible smile carved into his face. Still in the brown cardigan. Still unmoving. Except this time, he blinked. The sound intensified. It came from the walls, from under the floorboards, from inside the fixtures. It wasn't a voice. It was hundreds, each overlapping, each whispering something different. Words and languages Mark didn't recognize. Names, maybe, or warnings. He didn't wait to hear more. He ran, not for the door, but for the balcony. The glass should have broken. Instead, it rippled, like liquid. He fell forward and landed in the street, not 3 stories down, just 1 step. The pavement met his feet like he'd stepped off a curb. Across the street, he looked up. The man was still there, perched on the balcony, just as before, grinning. The next morning, he left his keys on the front desk and drove back to his mother's house. He told no one, not the landlord, not the tenants, not his replacement. The nightmares came in waves, laughter behind doors, walls that shifted, faces pressed against glass. Always the smile. He tried to bury it, tried to let the memory dissolve like a bad dream. But weeks later, a newspaper clipping landed in his lap. Crescent View Apartments condemned due to interior collapse. A structural failure, the article said. No injuries, no fatalities. The city planned to demolish the rest. Still, that night, he felt watched. The smile returned behind his eyelids. The scent of old wood and copper clung to the corners of his room. And when he passed a mirror before bed, for a split second, he thought he saw his own reflection grinning. The storm had started somewhere past Hinckley, and by the time he reached the city limits of Duluth, the sky had folded into itself, gray on gray. Water streaked the windshield as the wipers hissed their rhythm. Daniel wasn't in town for long, just a weekend visit. A wedding. Someone from high school whose face he barely remembered, but whose invitation stirred something like guilt. He hadn't driven past the old neighborhood in decades. The building still stood on 8th Avenue East, 3 stories of soot-stained brick tucked behind a row of wind-bent pines. It looked smaller than he remembered, as childhood things always do. He slowed almost without thinking, parked across the street, let the engine tick as the rain softened to a mist. He crossed to the building and slipped inside the front entrance. The scent hit him first, a blend of dust, linoleum, and radiator heat. He moved on instinct to the second floor, Unit 2B. The door was open. Inside stood a woman in her 70s, wiping down the windowsill with a damp rag. Her frame was thinner now, hair silver and pinned back. She turned at the sound of his step, and a soft smile pulled at the corners of her mouth. "You don't remember me, do you?" Daniel blinked. Her voice stirred something, but nothing clear. He shook his head. She told him he used to live here, that she'd been the landlord then, and still was now. He glanced around. The apartment was empty, waiting on a new tenant. She asked if he wanted to look around, said she didn't mind. He agreed. As he moved through the space, she asked how he'd been. He told her about the firm he ran downstate, his small house outside Minneapolis, his wife. She nodded with a quiet pride and said she was glad to hear it. But her eyes lingered on him longer than the words required, as if searching for a thread. The bedroom was at the end of the hall. He stepped inside. The walls were different now, painted over, but the corners still curved the same way. Then he noticed something near the closet floor, a small bulge in the wall, faintly raised beneath the paint. He crouched, picked at the edge. The drywall crumbled easily, revealing a shallow hollow. Inside, a toy pocket knife. Red plastic handle, dulled steel blade, a small nick in the grip where a tooth mark once lived. He held it in his palm, and the years peeled back. Memories surged. The man who brought him here hadn't been his father. There was another name, another room, boarded windows, the cold fear of being alone. And then, her. She had found him. A young landlord then, suspicious of a man with a fake lease, a child who never played outside. She'd followed her gut, called the police, had him removed, had Daniel placed somewhere safe, but she never told him. The story had been rewritten by others, stitched into files, buried under time, and she had given him the knife. She had called the police that same night. The investigation uncovered the truth. Daniel had been taken from his real family when he was just 4. The couple who'd raised him claimed they couldn't have children. They'd forged documents, moved across counties. Daniel had been missing for nearly 2 years before she pieced it together. He was returned to his parents, but the memories had fractured and folded in on themselves. His mind had tucked them into the dark. Until now. He turned. She was standing in the hallway, silent, watching him. He crossed the room in 2 steps and hugged her. His chest shook with the weight of it. She wrapped her arms around him, steady and still. "I remember," he whispered. His voice cracked on the edge of it. He hadn't known he'd needed to say it until the words arrived. Outside, the rain had thinned to a mist. Daniel drove slowly through the old neighborhood, the pocket knife resting on the seat beside him. He picked up his phone, dialed home. It rang once, then twice. When his wife answered, he paused. The words sat heavy, waiting to be let out. "I have something to tell you," he said. The light turned green, and he drove on. If you enjoyed these stories, please consider subscribing to the channel. Give it a like, a comment, and maybe a share. But if you didn't like the stories, maybe share it with someone you don't like. In any case, I'm glad you stuck around to the end.